Welcome to the Butterfly Effect. I'm Chris Horner. This is the individual time trial, last stage 2022 Tour de Suisse, stage 8. Now, when we went to bed last night, we knew Geraint Thomas, the big-time favorite to win the overall classification, at just 2 seconds behind the Bora Hansgrohe rider Higuita. He's got to be the big outright favorite to win Tour de Suisse here, but he's still got to deliver, right? On paper, Geraint Thomas is the favorite, but in bike racing, as in all sports, you got to play the game if you actually want to be the winner. So when today's stage starts, we got 3 riders to look at for the general classification. Of course, it's Higuita wearing yellow. It's Geraint Thomas in second just by 2 seconds. And then Jakob Fuglsang, the Israel Premier Tech rider, he's 19 seconds down on the general classification. Now, there's a couple other guys to keep an eye on today's individual time trial because Stefan Kuhn, who I left out of my commentary on yesterday's stage, he's down on general classification in 7th, just about 2 minutes back there on GC. And then, of course, we go just outside the top 10. Remco Evenepoel, who's not going to have any shot at going at a podium on the general classification here on today's individual time trial, but we got to look at him as a possible stage winner because Remco Evenepoel is flying into individual time trials. So when today's stage starts and the cameras turn on, it's Peter Sagan, Total Energy, that's out with COVID. Guys, this is his 3rd time of having COVID in 18 months. You can't get worse luck than this if you're Peter Sagan. With this many bouts of COVID, of course, the relegations throughout the Tour de France with the officials, and then the crashes at last year's Tour de France with Caleb Ewan. And now just coming back after recovering from COVID, he gets it here again on this last stage and won't start stage 8 of Tour de Suisse. When we're getting into the really narrow window here before the Tour de France starts. Now, when the racing starts, we're going to see it in the waiting room there. Nico Dens from DSM, he is dousing himself with water. So we know it's an extremely hot day out here at Tour de Suisse. And that's going to be the MO for just about every rider out here, is cooling themselves off with their cooling vests before the stage starts, watering themselves down. And then throughout the stage, we're going to see Geraint Thomas and Stefan Kuhn grabbing water from the side of the road and dousing themselves to try to stay cool because it's that hot here on stage 8 of Tour de Suisse individual time trial. Now, Chad Haggard, the human-powered health team, he's the first rider to come through with the best time of the stage, and Chad Haggard's in the hot seat. Doesn't have to hold it too long. He did give an interview talking about how hard the headwind section was the last 9 kilometers of this course. And remember, this course is almost dead flat. They'll start off, they'll go along a river with mountain views in the background, and in front of them, basically all around. That's usually the way it is here at Tour de Suisse. And they'll come off the river and then they'll start heading to the foothills, but they won't actually go up. The most difficult thing about today's stage is really just about 3% as you're going up to the time check. After that, the last 1K, there's a roundabout they'll go into, and they'll exit that roundabout with about 500, 600 meters to go with a long straight section, and then they'll go into a tight corner and come out with 75 meters to go onto cobblestones and finish today's stage. It's 25.6 kilometers long total on today's stage, so it's going to be under a half hour for the leaders on today's stage when it's all said and done. Now, let's get into the action because Chad Haggard, like I said, he was in the hot seat. And then next to come up is going to be Dylan Van Baarle from Ineos. Dylan Van Baarle's time at 20 seconds under Chad Haggard. This is starting to look solid here. And we're with both these 2 times from Chad Haggard and Dylan Van Baarle, they're the first to break the 30-minute barrier here on stage 8. Now, next to come up, Michael Matthews, we'll see as he comes up to the ramp here, we see him fiddling with something underneath his seat. When he leaves the ramp, we'll see it dangling from the back, a little computer box. I'm not certain exactly what this is, but you can literally hear it clinking on his seat post every time the cameras come up to the sprint competition leader here of Bike Exchange, Michael Matthews. He'll still finish today's stage, though, even with the electrical problems he's having. Now, when we go up to the finish line, it's Jonas Ruch, TdF Education, tongue hanging out, throwing the bike, going across the line. It's not for a winning time by any means, but the effort here from TdF Education's 2-man team here of Jonas Ruch is solid when he's finishing off the last stage here of Tour de Suisse. Now we'll see Danny Martinez in the waiting room, and he's got a special color TT bike here. Clearly, the Ineos time trial bike is getting some refinements done before the Tour de France starts, and they want to hide all of it here at Tour of Suisse. But they want to be able to try out the bike in competition, so Danny Martinez is going to leave the ramp with that special bike. But before he does, Remco Evenepoel, the quick-step rider, one of the big-time favorites to win here on the last stage of Tour of Suisse, he'll leave the ramp looking fabulous in his TT position. He's tucked in tight. He's not a very tall rider, but he's powerful, strong, and he's won individual time trials already here in 2022 at the Volta al Algarve when he won the general classification and took the TT stage. Now, Remco Evenepoel is flying on the pedals up front, getting closer to finishing this stage 8 is his teammate from Quick-Step, Elan van Wilder. Van Wilder is coming out of the TT position late, and it's a downhill run under 1 kilometer to go coming into that roundabout. As he comes into that roundabout, we see him get out of the aero bars late. Problem is, first hand he takes off the bars is the right, so I assume it's going to his back brake because it's the right hand. You don't get a whole lot of stopping power out of these TT bikes with the back wheel, especially when you're going downhill. Remember, all your weight is at the front of the position. The TT bike really pushes the weight forward onto the front wheel more than any other bike you'll ride, and as that's happening, when you see his right hand get on the back brake there, when he starts applying that brake, it's not going to slow the bike down fast enough. Now, most of the riders were going right, and Van Wilder's going to decide to go left. He puts his left hand onto the brakes and starts to slow the bike down, but not fast enough. As he goes through the left roundabout, we'll see the marshal there in the middle of the road waving that you can go either right or left. Van Wilder, like I said, he goes left, can't make the turn, and goes straight into the chain link fencing that's surrounding the outside of this roundabout and flip over the bars and land on the other side of the curb. Luckily, he's got people there to look after him, and the emergency crew show up shortly after that. Now back at the start ramp, Stefan Kuhn, one of the big-time favorites here, the European individual time trial champion from last year. He's all decked out in the skin suit. He's ready to leave the start ramp. Stefan Kuhn looks fabulous as he does and immediately gets into the aerodynamic position for his TT bike. Waiting to start his race is going to be Geraint Thomas. Looks focused. Now let's get back into the racing because it's Remco Evenepoel coming through the first time check, 28 seconds up on all the riders before him. At this point in time, we know Remco Evenepoel is flying. He's staying in his aerodynamic position and going for 100% here at a chance to win the last stage of Tour of Suisse. Danny Martinez is the next to come through the time check, and he's just under 30 seconds behind Remco Evenepoel's time. When I was sitting on the couch, I was looking at Danny Martinez's time there thinking, wow, this is a terrible time. And then the GCN commentators had to remind me that it's Remco Evenepoel who went in just in front of him and is blazing this course. With every pedal stroke, Remco Evenepoel is doing a solid job. Next to start from the ramp, though, is going to be all the big favorites. Neilson Powless will leave the ramp at this moment, followed by Jakob Fuglsang. Geraint Thomas, the big-time favorite here to win the general classification and possibly the stage. This is what he does, his individual time trials. He'll take off from the ramp on his special colored bike there for Team Ineos as he's riding something special, getting ready for the Tour de France, just like his teammate in front of him, Danny Martinez, was. Now, last to leave the ramp, Sergio Higuita will leave the ramp, and then we go to the next time check here of Stefan Kuhn, who actually is up on Remco Evenepoel by 2 seconds. We got a dogfight here on the last stage of Tour of Suisse. Up the road, Remco Evenepoel's throwing in solid efforts. He'll cross the finish line 1:05 up on anybody before him to take the hot seat here at Tour of Suisse, stage 8. But he's still got other guys behind him because let me remind you, Remco Evenepoel, as if I need to because you know it and I know it, behind it's Geraint Thomas. He's doing 61 kilometers an hour on the bike, so you know you better start paying attention. Stefan Kuhn, like I said, he already had the fastest time at the time check at over 2 minutes faster than Remco Evenepoel, so we know there's a lot of doubt left here on stage 8. Stefan Kuhn's looking beautiful on the pedals behind as the other top 4 favorites come through the time check. Neilson Powless comes through the time check just 17 seconds behind the time up front of Kuhn. Now he's coming through with a solid time, the American rider. He could possibly move himself onto a podium here if he has any luck with Sergio Higuita having a bad ride, or Jakob Fuglsang could have a bad ride, or heck, even Geraint Thomas can still at this point in time, with Neilson Powless just looking solid through this time check. Next to come through will be Fuglsang, only about 20 seconds lost to Stefan Kuhn's time. He's riding solid, but still not in with a shot here at winning today's stage. Next to come through will be Geraint Thomas, and he's only 7 seconds down on Stefan Kuhn's time split here early at this stage 8. The last and final rider to come through this time check, Sergio Aguita, the Bora-Hansgrohe rider. He comes through 51 seconds down on Stefan Kuhn's time. Now, Sergio Aguita is in trouble right here because Jakob Fuglsang is up on him by about 31 seconds here at this first time check. And remember, the general classification, there was only a 19-second split difference between Higuita and Fuglsang for third place. So Higuita right now is fighting for his life. And if you wanted to take it a little bit deeper, if Aguita starts to fall apart on the second half of this stage 8, he could lose a podium altogether to Neilson Powless, the American rider from EF Education. Now, when we go back up front, Stefan Kuhn, who's coming out of the roundabout at just about 500-600 meters to go. He's still got 25 seconds to play with as he comes out of the final left-hand turn onto the cobblestones. We know Remco Evenepoel still in front of Stefan Kuhn because he'll cross the line. 10 seconds back on Remco Evenepoel, who now is looking excited in the hot seat. But Remco Evenepoel, no, there's still some drama out on the course because Geraint Thomas is flying back there. Let me remind you, he was only 7 seconds off the favorite time at the time check, and that was Stefan Kuhn. So that means he's only 5 seconds behind Remco Evenepoel. EF Education rider Neilson Powless, who looked fabulous in the first half of this course. Now he's got a bike issue as he's coming into the last 500 meters. He does a fabulous job of keeping the speed of the bike for as long as he can as he steps off to the left side of the bike and brings his bike to a stop behind the EF Education mechanic. He does a fabulous job of switching bike up front with Neilson Powless, and Powless is back on the bike. That will cost Neilson Powless a little bit of time, and he won't move up his general classification from 4th up into the podium when today's race finishes. Fuglsang's coming through at 3 kilometers to go, and at this point in time, we know Jakob Fuglsang's not going to win the stage, but can he move up on the general classification and put himself into a solid second? Because Geraint Thomas is looking fabulous. We'll see him douse himself with the water bottle one last time, then he'll toss it, fly through the roundabout, keeping the bike upright, and look like he never even lost a beat on the pedals. With 1 kilometer to go, he's dropping down into the roundabout. He'll dive through the roundabout, and now we know the time is going to be close here to Remco Evenepoel and Geraint Thomas. With 400 meters to go, the time check is 27 seconds still. Geraint Thomas has to play around with Remco Evenepoel, so he's got no time to play. He better get on the pedals and start driving hard. At 150 meters to go, he's got about 13 seconds left when he comes out of the 75 meters in the last turn here onto the cobblestones. Geraint Thomas is still in the green. He's still got a shot here of winning the last and final stage of Tour of Suisse. We know the general classification is just about wrapped up for Geraint Thomas at this point in time. But can he win this stage from Remco Evenepoel? All the way to 25 meters to go. And then finally Remco Evenepoel, as the time changes to the red, knows he's going to win today's stage 8. But Geraint Thomas is still going to be happy because he's going to win the general classification. Sergio Aguita, who had a fabulous second half of this individual time trial, will come across the line 1:17 on Remco Evenepoel's time for 11th on the stage. But more important for Sergio Aguita is the time gap that he kept to Jakob Fuglsang, only losing about 15 seconds. Let me remind you, at that time check, he was 31 seconds down deficit to Jakob Fuglsang, and this second half of the course was mighty important for the Bora-Hansgrohe rider if he wanted to finish second on the general classification. Geraint Thomas, of course, wins today's general classification, doing a spectacular individual time trial and finishing second on the stage, only a couple seconds off of Remco Evenepoel's time. Third on the stage is Stefan Kuhn from FDJ. Fourth will be Ineos rider Martinez, who had a fabulous ride to finish off in the top 5 here at Tour of Suisse. Now, when we're talking about Jakob Fuglsang, he held on to keep a podium here, but remember, with that time gap back at that first time check, he was above Sergio Aguita and was moving into second on the general classification at that point in time. At the finish of the race, of course, we know that he doesn't get second on the general classification and finishes third. But what I want to dissect here a little bit closer, first place for winning Tour of Suisse is 500 points to Team Ineos, Geraint Thomas. Second place is 400 points to Sergio Aguita's Bora-Hansgrohe team. And now third is 325 points for Israel Premier Tech. So Jakob Fuglsang, with this second half in this individual time trial lost 75 points for Israel Premier Tech, who need as many points as they can possibly get to keep their Israel Premier Tech team in the elite status here of the World Tour teams over here racing at the European Peloton. So today's race for Jakob Fuglsang, even though later in his interview he said he gave 100%, gave everything he could, he's more or less happy with a podium finish here at Tour of Suisse. But he also brings up the fact that he was the only rider really attacking out of the big favorites at any of these stages here at Tour of Suisse. Well, we know Sergio Aguirre attacked big time on yesterday's stage with about 2.5 kilometers to go. But aside from that, I got to agree with Jakob Fuglsang. He was one of the most aggressive, if not the most aggressive, of the big-time favorites here attacking. But you have to be. Because Geraint Thomas, he doesn't have to be, because we know he can win the individual time trials or place above all the GC favorites like he did at today's last stage of Tour of Suisse to win the Tour of Suisse here. Now, with that win from Geraint Thomas, he's the first British rider, I believe, to win here at Tour of Suisse. In 2015, he had podiumed here at Tour of Suisse with a second on the general classification. And that stage back in 2015 for the individual GC, he was second on the general classification, but lost to Simone Spilak, who was third on the general classification, under 15 seconds behind him, who had jumped over him to win the Tour of Suisse that year. So when we think back to yesterday's stage, and I'm sitting up here on the podium of the Butterfly Effect and telling you guys that it's 100% that Geraint Thomas could win the individual time trial. Remember, you go back to 2015, he lost the individual time trial there and the overall classification at Tour of Suisse, but then wins here in 2022. Just a couple weeks before the Tour de France begins proper. So, Geraint Thomas, in my mind, right at this moment for Team Ineos, has to be one of the outright favorites as leading the team for Team Ineos. In his interview after the race, the reporter asked him, can he go man against man with the two Slovenians? Now, I love his response, because you know on the Butterfly Effect, I like it to be told the way it is, and Geraint Thomas does. He says, man against man, I cannot beat the two Slovenians. But the Team Ineos as a group, they stand a chance to beat the two Slovenians, but they got to be perfect, and they have to stay healthy on this last period before you go into the Tour de France. And of course, in my belief anyways, you got to stay healthy that first week, 8 days of the Tour de France, when you're going through all that chaos up north, the cobblestones, and then when you start getting into the mountains, that's when things will start to mellow out a little bit more for Team Ineos. So they have to keep their team healthy, they have to keep their team together. And I believe right here on the Butterfly Effect that when it comes to Team Ineos, they have solid numbers. The big, most important thing Team Ineos can do, though, is when we start getting into those first mountain stages, that you don't have to be the most aggressive team there at the Tour de France. You got to wait till you get later in the mountain stages so that the teams, Team Jumbo-Visma, Team UAE, Emirates, those two teams can start getting a little bit more tired. Let Primoz Roglic, Tadej Pogačar attack each other if they made it through that first week, healthy that is. Let those two go at each other, follow all the moves, and wait for that final week at the Tour de France when we get into the big mountains and everybody's legs are tired. Have maximum numbers high up on the general classification so you can put pressure on the two Slovenians from Jumbo-Visma and UAE Team Emirates when you get to the Tour de France. So, in his interview, do I agree with him with Team Ineos? Yes, you have good numbers at Team Ineos, but you better be perfect, and we haven't seen that in years past at the Tour de France. But at this moment, when the Tour de Suisse finishes, Geraint Thomas has got to be one of the favorites. So make sure you guys like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next edition of the Butterfly Effect.